should be live. We'll wait a few minutes for people to log on, but I'm trying to work out, to those that see this, a new microphone, but for some reason, the sound comes on when I go live. People can hear it, but when I play back the video, it's not showing up. So I'm switching back to my other microphone, so it may not sound as good as I expected, but we'll work on that, and I'll try to figure it out. If anyone knows why, I can't figure out why when I plug in, I have a camera/microphone together, the Logitech that I'm recording on now. It's what you can see. But the separate mic is supposed to be much better. When I plug that in, you can hear me through it. But when it records, I can't hear. There's no sound on the playback. So I'm not quite sure why that's happening. I have to try to figure that out. I do want to get a better sound quality for these. We're going to start recording these, not just video and live, but as a podcast. And we're going to put that as audio on the website. So we'll start in 1 second. Okay, so good afternoon. This is I'm Steve Mazikane. This is Steve Mazikane Podcast. I thank you for joining me. No, we were not on Thursday. People called. I apologize for that, and I have promised that from now on, if we're not going to make it back, I was out covering something, I will make sure we get you a notice. Apparently, there were people looking for the podcast at 4, and I get it. It's election season. It's kind of a big deal, and so I apologize for that. I will make sure we get a notice out if I cannot be live one day. And part of the, the other day somebody asked, why do we call it a podcast? We call it a podcast because it was never meant to be live. It was supposed to be recorded, have guests, what have you, and just, put out as a podcast. But from a standpoint of transparency and allowing people to ask questions and know who's the person speaking, this made far more sense. I can actually have a conversation with people. They can ask questions. They can follow up. If there's something you disagree with, you can explain why. And I think that's worked out well. And I think we've been able to be a good source of information. You can see the way I think through things. And we're trying to do something a little different. We're not trying to be sensational. We're not trying to yell and scream. We're not trying to yell or be the loudest person in the room yelling an opinion. We're trying to look at facts. We're trying to look at reason and logic and analyze news and events based on that. So today we'll talk about, we are 2 weeks away from Election Day. And we've been talking about this stimulus. Nancy Pelosi gave Trump and the Republicans 2 days, 48 hours to come up with a proposal or some word on the stimulus. None of this really matters. Trump is now saying he wants more money. That's fine. But unless the senators move on it, it's irrelevant. And it's amazing to look at this in that every single economist, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter, Wall Street, all of the experts have said we desperately need a stimulus, and they cannot come to a conclusion. And so the Democrats are saying Republicans won't play ball. Republicans are saying, you're putting things in here that have nothing to do with Corona, or their personal agendas or what have you, and they're just at a stalemate. In the meantime, we're starting to see it. A lot of restaurants, a lot of businesses in town are seeing the drop off. There are people that are going to start having a hard time paying bills, and it's reality. It's just the mess up that's in Washington right now. But for today, I wanted to talk about, and I put political strategy here, and talk about the races in the 102nd, the 98th, and the 12th Senate District. We'll talk a little bit about Madison, too, because it's kind of, we're seeing some issues there. What has been cordial between those two, John Michael, I forgot his last name, but it's Michael something, and Noreen Kokoruta, because it's kind of a microcosm of what these issues are. But if you're a political strategist and you came into this election and you were, let's say you were on the Republican side, it's very likely you would realize what everybody seems to already know, right? This is going to be a presidential year. This is a Democratic state, a fairly Democratic district, fairly Democratic towns. Branford is a little more balanced, but Guilford's left. Madison's moving to the left. And so if you knew those things, you said to yourself, how do I win an election? Winning an election has nothing to do with telling the truth. It has nothing to do with morals or ethics. At the end of the day, if you win, almost all is forgiven, right? You can say or do whatever you need to do, you won. And that's the job, and that's what people are paid for. These political strategists are paid to win. And so they came up with a couple issues, and these issues have become universal. It seems like every single town that has a Republican running against a Democrat have run on very similar issues. One is that police bill, right? And that police bill is incredibly controversial. There are legitimate arguments on both sides. Most police departments are very upset with the bill. We cannot forget the fact that that bill was really a knee-jerk reaction by Democrats to push support for a portion of their base. In an election year, they weren't going to let that go. They're going to have to pass something. I would not have voted for it if I was a representative, but I understand why they voted for it. And we'll get to that. Well, we can talk a little bit about that now too, is that the job of a state representative or of a state senator is to represent their town or their district, but they're also making decisions for a state. So if somebody votes on that bill, it doesn't necessarily mean they're condemning the local police department. It could mean that they see a problem in other towns, particularly inner cities, where the police may be an issue. For whatever reason, the Democrats voted for it, the Republicans voted against it. We knew this was going to be a political issue. We knew it was going to be discussed at election time. Everybody knew that going in. Democrats didn't mind so much because they're going to have the numbers. At the end of this election, there's a 99.9% chance Democrats have the House, Democrats have the Senate, and obviously they already have the governorship. The second one that has become significant is this idea of redistricting, of putting in, Branford with East Haven, or no one would ever say, let's put Branford with Guilford because that might be a good thing, but then Guilford would hate that. And then say Guilford with Madison, and Guilford would be like, sure, and then Madison would hate that. So this idea of selling fear has been a universal one. It's been one, I'm looking at every single race, and I'm seeing it in the Christine Cohen-LaPorta race. I'm seeing it in the Noreen Kokoruta race. I'm obviously seeing it in the 102nd district race. So the strategy seems to be a state-down strategy that everybody said, let's run after this. So there's a couple issues with that. So first, in the 102nd district, Mark Ricchio's run on fear of redistricting and the police bill. Police bill, there's going to be a difference of opinion. Those are legitimate. You can go after Robin Comey for the police bill. That's her vote. She stands by that vote. The supporters will support her. Those against her will be against her. That's just the nature of that. This would be the same thing for tolls or some tax bills. It's basically the same issue. On the regionalization aspect of it, it was a nonsense story. It was just trying to sell fear. And let's put it this way. They're basing the entire argument on a bill for a study that passed just committee and didn't go past further than that. But let's go a step further. If regionalization was actually proposed, then we can ask a legitimate question. Where were the Republicans? If they had no problem getting in front of every mic known to man when they were against the police bill. They had no problem getting in front of every camera you can possibly get in front of when tolls were being talked about or when a budget's being talked about. But I didn't hear anybody talk about regionalization. It was not on anybody's mind. Nobody thought it was going to happen. Nobody thought it was a potential to happen. It was nothing. So to suddenly get to election season and yell that makes no sense. To go a step further, in the 102nd district, it's an argument that will fall flat, primarily because Robin Comey's made her bones on education. And that's not a joke. I mean, you can go after her for not being or being informed or on other issues, but on education, that's one thing you cannot say about her is that she has spent her time on the BECC. She's the director of the BECC. She's been in Hartford many times on education issues. She has worked with many parents locally on education issues. So to go after her on regionalization of Branford schools, it just is nonsense. So it may work to instill fear in a certain group of people, but it's not going to work in general to go after that base, that parents and family base that you're trying to get isn't going to happen. The law and order base you may get with the police bill, but you were likely going to get them no matter what. When you talk about the LaPorta race, we have to remember that Cohen won 2 years ago, primarily on the strength of Guilford. And she didn't do great in all the other cities. Will that change this year? Well, let's look at it this way. In I'm going to break down the election results from 4 years ago or 2 years ago, but this is what happens in the. All right, so let's look at the 102nd district. This is Robin Comey versus Mark Riccio. In 2016, Clinton Kaine on the Democratic Party, 8,453, and Trump Pence, hold on, was 6,585. That's townwide. So in townwide, Clinton won by almost 2,000 votes. Now, if we go down to that year was Sean Scanlon ran unopposed, Ted Kennedy ran against Bruce Wilson. So there was some help for Lonnie Reed because the top of the ticket was Clinton, Ted Kennedy, then Scanlon. Scanlon's a different group, but Scanlon was on some ballots, but he was unopposed. And then you got to Lonnie Reed. Lonnie Reed beat Chris Kelly, who was not, a great, really opponent by 1,800 votes. 6,878 and 5,068, which is, there are so many more voters in an election with the presidential thing at the top of the ticket every 4 years. And most of those new voters, those additional voters, are Democrats. So if you're looking at numbers, and Robin Comey won fairly easily 2 years ago, she's only going to be helped by an influx of national voters. Now, some of them may not go down the ticket, but most will. And I'll tell you that if there's an increase in absentee ballots, people typically on an absentee go down the ballot. They're sitting home, they have time to go down it, they can do that. So all the early voting will be pushed to Democrats. Day of will be Republicans. That's pretty standard. But I think you're going to have more people voting down ticket, and those people voting down ticket will be Democrats. I don't see a path for Robin Comey to lose. That said, I don't think regionalization has anything that actually resonates with anybody, especially against Robin Comey, who's the education person. The police thing, the people who are going to be upset about the police matter were already upset about the police matter. So I think Democrats did a quick count in their head prior to even that vote. So I see it's unlikely that to change too much going forward. Where it could be interesting is the Cohen race, but we're seeing you can gain a lot by looking at what people are saying politically. If you don't see attack ads coming, that means they believe they're way ahead. So Robin Comey has not attacked Riccio. Cohen has not attacked Laporta. They have posts correcting their record. There have been attacks from those are behind. Riccio and Laporta are attacking, and there's been posts by Comey and by Cohen to kind of correct the record. But if you're going negative, it's usually because you feel you're behind. And think about Christine Cohen 2 years ago. There was a good chance she was behind with 2 weeks to go against Adam Greenberg, and the race was nasty. I mean, just some of the nastiest mailers I've ever seen. They were either from her campaign or from organizations helping her campaign. They were trying to put Greenberg in with, Newtown and just awful things. It was terrible and ridiculous and nonsense. But we have the opposite happening in Madison, where the front runner is likely not the incumbent. The front runner is likely the Democrat. I'm going to pull this up because what has happened there is interesting. If we pull up, and anybody can do this, go to Facebook and just do Noreen Kokaruda. And so clearly she sent out a mailer that kind of compared her opponent, John Michael Partner, who has never held office, by the way. He's run before. He lost by like a handful of votes 2 years ago. So anybody with a brain can look at it and say, listen, if you lost by a handful of votes in an election without a president on top, now with the Democratic push, there's a good chance Madison's leaning more and more Democrat slightly than it has in the past. But here's some of the ways, without coming out directly and lying about an opponent and making something up, you can do it. John Michael Parker. This is Noreen Kokaruda mailer about her opponent. John Michael Parker has a lot of ideas, but no plan to pay for them. With a projected $2.1 billion deficit, Democrats want to continue payroll tax and continue to increase the minimum wage. Parker will not make the difficult decisions to rein in wasteful spending. Okay, that's general. He goes after him for being a member and endorsed by the Working Families Party, which becomes a key aspect here. Here's the next one. The Defund the Police movement has started here in Connecticut with the recently passed police accountability bill. John Michael, now he wasn't there, so he didn't vote. So she has to find a different way, and this is just political strategy. I'm not saying right or wrong, but if you're in this room, you say, all right, he didn't vote for it. How do I tie him to this argument? John Michael Parker is endorsed by the Working Families Party, who wants to totally defund police departments. Electing Parker for state representative means less police will be protecting our communities and keeping our families safe. So it may be a stretch to say the agenda of Group X is to do this. They endorsed candidate Y, therefore candidate Y wants to do that. That's a stretch, but it's not beyond the realm of comprehension. We can understand that. The average person can understand it. Is it a little nasty? Maybe, but it's not an outright lie. You're just connecting some things. Protecting local control of education and zoning. Legislative Democrats and the Working Families Party are looking to take away local control of schools and zoning laws. As their endorsed candidate, would John Michael Parker vote to those proposals or would he oppose them? Voters should know where he stands on those two important issues. So in this one, she doesn't even make a claim. She just says, I don't know how he would do it, so therefore what? I haven't seen any push to regionalize schools. And I haven't seen any push, and by the way, we're talking about push that gets traction. Like thousands of bills get proposed every year that go nowhere. I haven't seen any push that's going to remove zoning laws. There was a proposal that would create housing districts, like a 30-mile housing districts based out of major cities. No way any representative, Democrat or Republican, from any of these, Branford, Guilford, votes for those bills. They don't have water. They never go anywhere. So it's interesting to see the strategy here. Noreen's behind. It's very likely John Michael Parker wins just because of the influx of voters because of a presidential race. And so it changes everything. The strategies have been similar. If you're behind, attack. If you're ahead, stay quiet. This time of year, and you can talk to candidates on both sides, every person who's way ahead gets nervous as hell. Every person who's behind thinks they have a chance. If you're running that person's campaign, the one who's behind, you make them go to doors where their supporters are, right? So they get confidence. Man, I knocked on 10 doors today and everybody's voting for me. Holy cow, this is amazing. We're going to win this thing. You're down by 15 points. They don't know that. So if you're running that campaign, you make sure they get that vote of confidence. Right now on the Riccio campaign, that's what's happening. They're surrounded by supporters and there's confidence. And quite frankly, some of their online presence outside of his personal online presence, but some of the videos and things of that nature are good videos. They're quality videos. They're not true. No one's trying to regionalize. It's a nonsense argument. It's fear-mongering. But from a strategy standpoint, it's not bad. Noreen, with this mailer, is clearly feeling she's behind. And so she sent out that attack. He posted on Facebook that I've been attacked. She posted something else. And quite frankly, she's caught up in a bunch of online discussions now, which is really, really bad for the campaign. Once you start posting online in conversations, you have the issue of losing your message. Like the message for a campaign is decided. You're sitting in a room with people that you trust. You have your experts. Here's our message. Everything contains that message. Once you start going back and forth in comments, that message gets convoluted. Because either it wasn't clear before or you're just all over the place. It's a huge mistake. It's kind of happening in the Kokoruta campaign. She's a great woman. I think she's bipartisan. She's served many, not many years, but well for a long time. I think she's well respected. The numbers don't support her right now in Madison. And that's just, the way Madison is going. So it's very interesting. Now, something else is about to happen, and what happened either over the weekend or this morning. There was discussion in Branford, and this is where local Democrats can even hurt state candidates at times. The idea that Comey's against police or would hurt the police has been out there. The police are not happy with Robin Comey. I've spoken to police officers; they're not happy with her. That bill, there's a question on how much that bill does, how much it doesn't do. But I saw this morning that the head of the RTM on the Democratic side, the minority leader, Tom Brockett, sent into the RTM a resolution in support of Black Lives Matter. And this opens up a whole nother door. It literally is Black Lives Capital, this organization, due to murders of George Floyd and a few other ones, it lists it, and that Branford is supportive of this movement and works to be this, like, holy shit. One, it's a deliberate attempt to divide. What it really is an attempt to go after Jamie Cosgrove, but we'll talk about that in a second. But now you have the group of people who are behind Comey, behind Cohen, sending in a resolution that basically is a big fuck you to the police departments. That they want Branford's RTM and Board of Selectmen to say, we're behind Black Lives Matter. It is basically saying, I don't care about the cops. I'm sorry. Let's make this clear. You can be for equality. Black Lives Matter has no monopoly on equality. Whether you're for Black Lives Matter or not for Black, it has nothing to do with how you feel about equal rights. There are people that will work to tie those two together, but it's nonsense. But as a town, I'm not publicly supporting any group that has had fuck the police signs on the town green. I am not supporting any group that has had defund the police signs on the town green. I am not for any group that will look at those officers' faces and say, as we've seen, fuck you, that they shouldn't have a job, or the stupid crap we've seen in some of these rallies. You're either for that or you're not. If you have that rally, if I have a rally and somebody shows up and says, fuck the police, I'm stopping the rally immediately and calling out that crap. And now we have Tom Brockett and Democrats in Branford, elected Democrats in Branford, trying to get the RTM and the Board of Selectmen to pass a resolution in support of Black Lives Matter. Tom Brockett's an asshole. That's not news. We've known that. But now, if you have the people with the Comey signs in their yards who are working to get her elected, or working to get Christine Cohen elected, this is fair game. She can be asked about this. This makes no sense. This is basically saying, I don't care about the police department, because there's no way a police officer can look at the town passing a resolution in favor of Black Lives Matter in a positive way. Just won't happen. The stuff they have yelled, the stuff they've called for is nonsense. And they do not speak for those who would ask for equality, equal rights, in any way, shape, or form. It is ridiculous that that would happen. And if the Democrats are that stupid, Robin Comey should have to say something and condemn that dumb resolution. The RTM should laugh it out of the room. You don't have to be a member of Black Lives Matter or supportive of Black Lives Matter to believe that all people are equal, to believe that everyone should have an equal opportunity. What is actually happening is the Democrats are starting the 2021 election now. What they want to happen is at the November RTM meeting, they have a debate over whether this resolution should pass or not. They want to try to tie Jamie Cosgrove's hands. Here's the problem. Jamie Cosgrove is a very good first selectman. I've said that many times. Half the Democratic Party knows that. Most of town is well aware of that. Branford is probably one of the best run towns in the state. If I'm a strategist, I'm saying, wait a minute. We may have Democrats riled up for the 2020 election. How do we keep them riled up for another year? We can't win on local stuff. We can't win on building senior centers. Democrats voted against that. We can't win on environmental issues. Democrats voted against the environmental issues and the energy conservation plans in Branford. They can't win any of those arguments. So how do we take national issues and make them local? How do we take a first selectman like Jamie Cosgrove, who has never got involved in national? You never see him talking about it. You want a conversation with Jamie Cosgrove, you're probably going to end up talking about a senior center or public works or paving roads. You're never talking about national crap. And the Democrats are going to try to say, let's take as much national stuff and push it to local to keep our base riled up. That's their strategy. In the meantime, what they're doing is disgusting. Talk about divisive. Talk about trying to rip communities apart, trying to separate people, trying to start arguments, trying to start war between people. A resolution for Black Lives Matter? In the first RTM meeting after the 2020 election? We're not stupid. And these are people that are working to get the Democrats in the State House elected. It's fair game. You have a political party, elected officials pushing an agenda. This goes beyond, let's separate the levels of government now. They're trying to take those issues and make them as local as possible. They don't belong here. No, it belongs on a local level. You create systems of equality. You make it inexpensive to move to. You create services that people can enjoy of all races, all economic groups. You invest in education, as we have in a new school. We have far more new programs in our Parks and Rec department. We have far more open space than we ever had. At the same time, our mill rate has gone down in the last year. We have condos for $120,000 that could be purchased. You can live in Brantford, in a shoreline town, have access to a ton of events, trails, open space, programs, theater, all of these aspects. Community dining room, orchard house, all of these services. A new community house, a new Walsh Intermediate School for less taxes than you can get anywhere in the world, or based on the world, in the state. The mill rate went down. You get more for your money in Brantford than anywhere else. You want equality? Come to Brantford. You want an equal opportunity? Come to Brantford. You can get housing here. You can buy a condo and own property. If you want a trailer to start, buy a trailer to start. Then move up to a condo. You're going to pay lower taxes than anywhere else. In fact, if you're in New Haven, why would you stay in New Haven? It makes no sense. That's how you support equality. But you don't support it by passing a resolution for Black Lives Matter. The same group that would defund the police, that have no problem holding "fuck the police" signs on Brantford streets in front of the police officer that's guiding them down the street. If Tom Brockett stands for that, we now know the answer. The question is, what other Democrats are with him? Is Ray Dunbar with him? Former police officer? Was he in that room when this brilliant idea was hatched? Who else on the Democratic Party was on this to say, let's pass this resolution, that this makes sense in Brantford? We deserve an answer to that. And quite frankly, if people want answers from Robin Comey or Christine Cohen, who go to every DTC meeting, who know these people well, they should get them as well. It's your opportunity to address it one more time. I understand Robin Comey's vote on the police bill. I get it. I can see the reasons for it. I would not have voted that way, but it's not as black and white and it's not that simple. I get that it wasn't a condemnation of Brantford's police department. That we can have police departments in town that may not be up to Brantford in our state, that may not be up to Brantford standards. But then a resolution, not a statewide resolution, a Brantford resolution to support Black Lives Matter is just wrong. It's ridiculous. And it's just political games being played by someone who doesn't know what he's doing. Why in the world anybody listens to Tom Brockett is beyond me. You can get a college freshman political science major that would look at him and say, this is the dumbest shit you can possibly pull. And for some reason, the Democrats chose him to lead them. God help us all. Thankfully, on a local level, the Democrats are the minority. All right, we'll talk tomorrow night. We do want to talk about social media because there was some controversy last week where Facebook and Twitter would not post an article from the New York Post that was critical of Biden. And there's some serious laws on whether somebody's a publisher or a platform. We want to talk about that a little bit tomorrow. If there are questions, if there are issues to come up, send that in. And we'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And once again, I apologize for not giving some notice on Thursday that we weren't going to be live. I was busy, but I will make sure there's a notice in the future when that happens. Thanks for joining me. I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock.